All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 9th town hall. Just a couple of announcements before we get started. Next week, the week of December 19th and the week of December 26th, there won't be any new coursework that's due or that will be released. So just keep that in mind. Coursework will resume on January 2nd. Please do take, if you're a little bit behind or you owe any assignments, the next 2 weeks, even though it's a holiday break, we will have some tutors on. It will be a reduced amount of tutors, but they will still be available, and the calendar should be updated then. So if you have any assignments that you owe or any coursework that you need to go through, take those 2 weeks for catch-up time. So that way, when January 2nd comes, everybody is up to date. Next week, December 19th, is our last town hall for the year. And I have good news. I would like to announce that we are ending the town hall with a designer as our guest. And then we will resume town halls on January 9th. So we'll be off a couple weeks for town hall, and I'll keep you updated on Slack. All right, so without further ado, let me introduce you to Emmy. Emmy started to learn how to code at Reskill Americans last year with the goal of becoming a software engineer that same year. And despite hearing doubts and criticism from others, she accomplished her goal. Emmy is currently a software engineer at Walmart Global Tech. So welcome, Emmy, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So Emmy, just if you can introduce yourself a little bit and talk about how you decided, what was your career path before Reskill, what made you decide to go into tech, and what did you do to get yourself your first software engineering job?
Sure. So some background about me. I'm Emmy. Nice to meet all of you. And I hope that sharing my experience will help motivate you guys and inspire you guys in your career. I had previously been working in HR prior to being a software engineer, but during the pandemic, I just felt kind of like very like isolated and like just kind of like I was kind of stuck like in a career that I just didn't enjoy. I'd always kind of had an affinity for software engineering or like specifically coding, but I think especially like coming from like my parents were more conservative, so they just kind of didn't, they would just tell me, oh, like coding is for people who are smart and good at math and science. So I just never thought that I would was smart enough to be a software engineer, I guess, when I was like in high school. So that's why I never pursued it. But then during the pandemic, I realized, I was like, life is too short to be like doing a job that I only like kind of like, and on most days I hate. So that's when I decided I was going to start learning coding because I'd always had an interest in it. And then it was really fortunate, like right around the time, I think it was like March 2021, when I decided I wanted to start learning coding. I was like just Googling like resources online to learn coding for free. I came across like Free Code Camp and then something called the Odin Project. And then like in one of my Google searches, I came across Reskill Americans. I don't know how that popped up, but it's really fortunate it did. I saw a cohort was starting. And so I signed up, and I had no idea just like how it would change my life and like how amazing it was. And just like to have this opportunity to do it for free was just amazing. I started to like seriously learn how to code when I can't remember when the cohort started. I think it was like, might have been like April 2021. That was when I first started. And then like, I remember like, I was actually really intimidated. Like one of the first lessons was installing Git. And I had to rewatch that video like 4 times. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I'm like, even like all of this sounds so unnatural, like Git in it. Like, what are these commands? Like I was already intimidated. And I thought that I just wasn't cut out for it, but I still persisted. And I grew to love it. The mentors were great. Like the other students, like Alex and Lorraine were great too. So yeah. And then after the boot camp ended, or after Reskill Americans ended, I like started searching for either entry-level software engineering positions or apprenticeships. And that's how I came across this Walmart sponsored apprenticeship where they actually like paid for us to train for 12 weeks, but and then after that training period was over, we were able to interview, and those that passed the interview got a position with Walmart, and that's where I am today. So sorry, that was probably really long.
No, congratulations on that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had the opportunity to work together. I think Justin's on this call too. I don't know if Justin was in the same group as you and Justin Williams.
That's
You guys might
really
have been in a but yeah, so you did the boot camp and then you went into the apprenticeship. What was the process like getting into that apprenticeship? Did you have to go through some type of interview process, some kind of coding challenge? How was that?
Yes. So again, thanks to my friend Google, it just like I happened to be looking for an apprenticeship and that popped up. It was Walmart sponsored apprenticeship along with a boot camp called Hackbright. I saw that pop up when I was looking for software engineering apprenticeships. I applied and there was I guess a behavioral interview. And then after that, there was a coding interview where we got a whiteboarding type question. I don't know if they've become familiar with whiteboarding yet. Yeah, we got a coding challenge question. And then I think like about a week after I did my 2 interviews, I got a decision that I had been accepted. So that was exciting.
That's amazing. And yeah, the first year, I know there wasn't a lot of emphasis on whiteboarding and algorithms and data structures and all that, but that has changed for this year. That's going to be a focus that comes up in the curriculum pretty early on, because you know, by the time you finish the program, you should have some knowledge of data structures and algorithms. And, you know, you and I have kept in touch ever since the boot camp. And I know that we also follow each other on GitHub. And I saw that you were busy even after the boot camp. You were making projects, like studying and all that stuff. So I think it's important for people to realize, like, just because you finish a boot camp, just because you finish some type of online course or something, that there's still work to be done. So what are some of the things that you think set you up for success after the boot camp in terms of like setting up your resume or building projects or studying data structures and algorithms? Like, what are some of the things that you did that you think played a role into where you're at now?
So basically anytime, like even throughout the boot camp, anytime there was a concept that I didn't fully understand, I would like look up all other resources on it. Like, for example, I struggled a bit with dictionaries. Like I know that like my concept of like searching for diction or like my understanding of dictionaries I felt wasn't great. So like I looked up many resources online that I could do to do practice questions involving those. And it ended up paying off because I know like my first whiteboarding question with Walmart was like basically a dictionary or an object related question. So anytime you're struggling to understand something, it's like, because these concepts, they build off each other. So try to not just move on. It's more about like quality of understanding rather than, I mean, it is quantity too. You do want to understand like different concepts, but I think you shouldn't move on to the next like unit until you've really mastered one. Because you know, if you keep trying to learn more when you haven't mastered foundational knowledge, that it can be a bit confusing later on, I think. Yeah.
Very quickly, can you, just to back it up for those of us who don't know what whiteboarding is, can you go and explain a little bit of that?
Oh yeah, so whiteboarding is like a generic term, I guess, for in a coding interview, there will generally be like 2 different types of interviews. One will be behavioral, where they ask you questions like, oh, tell us about a time that you had a problem with a coworker and how did you solve that? Those types of questions, just to analyze, like, are you a good cultural fit for your company or your team? And then the second type of interview that you'll be given is a coding challenge type interview, where they actually like want to see, do you have the technical skill or at least the problem solving ability that is required for this position? And that is usually done through a process called whiteboarding, because I think back in the day, like pre-pandemic, it was actually like you would physically come in and write out on a whiteboard. Whereas now it's like online, like they have like an online whiteboard where like in my case, I physically typed my answers into a whiteboard like website and then my interviewers could see what I was typing at the same time, like in live time, they could see it. And so I could explain like my problem solving process to them. It'll usually be, or it's always questions on concepts that like they expect you to know, like arrays or objects, stacks, queues. Sorry, I don't know if those are familiar terms, but basically concepts you've learned. It'll be like some kind of coding related, a challenge question related thing, and it's almost always a question sourced from a website called LeetCode. I don't know if they're familiar with LeetCode, but if you're not familiar with LeetCode, definitely when you reach the interviewing stage, like or like the job search stage, become familiar with LeetCode, because all coding interview questions generally come from LeetCode or are a variation of a LeetCode question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've brought up LeetCode quite a few times already in,
Oh, okay,
these
sorry.
town halls, so they're kind of familiar with that already. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you haven't had the chance to mess around with LeetCode, I do advise that, you know, early on in your learning career that you and they have questions listed from easy to medium to hard. So while you're still learning concepts, it's good to practice those easy questions to just kind of get used to how LeetCode questions are done and worded and all that stuff.
Yeah. And if I may, the easiest way to learn LeetCode is to remember that like all LeetCode questions fall into like one of, I think 13, they've identified 13 patterns, I think, for LeetCode questions. So it helps like to pick one pattern and then do questions related to that. Because I've known some people that just like, they try to do a random question every day. And I don't think that's the most effective way to learn LeetCode. It's best to think of them with in terms of patterns. So that way, like you go at an interview, you see a question, you can immediately recognize, oh, it's like a array with an array pattern, or yeah, so and so. Yeah. So that's
there is a course called Grokking Coding
yes,
Interview.
that's what I use.
And it goes over those, I think it's 13, 14 concepts,
Yeah.
which you can use to solve practically any interview question. And yeah, I would recommend that course. I've purchased that course on educative.io. We can drop a link in the chat if you guys want to take a look at that. But yeah, I highly recommend that too. And yeah, and those whiteboarding questions are interesting when you're interviewing, because when you're whiteboarding, you're not really compiling your code, so you're not really being able to check like,
You
is
can't
my
see if
code
it fails right
working?
away. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and then I'll ask you, what is a typical day like for you there at Walmart as a software engineer?
So a typical day, like I always start with our daily stand-up. That's actually something that's not just unique to Walmart, but I think every engineering position will do a daily stand-up where we meet with our entire team. There will be a project manager, a product manager, a scrum master, and our tech lead will all be leading the daily stand-up. And it's basically like we just talk about what we did, what we worked on the day before, and what we plan on working on that day. And if we have any blockers, that will come up as well. So basically the purpose of the daily stand-up is just to make sure that like everybody is on the same page in terms of what they're working on. It keeps us on track in terms of like, we can see where we are in terms of achieving our sprint goals. So basically in software engineer, there's like so many terms. I don't know if you'll let me know if you need me to explain anything, but software engineering, like all work is broken up into things like a time period called a sprint. Like I think generally for us, a sprint is like 2 weeks, I think. And we set aside stories, or like basically like each story is like a goal that we want to complete within that sprint. So that's the purpose of the daily stand-up, seeing where we are in terms of our progress. Yeah. So we'll have our daily stand-up, and then after that, I will, if I'm not like in some more meetings, I will basically just work on these stories or tickets, as you would call them. Right now, I'm primarily a front-end full-stack software engineer. So some tickets that I worked on recently have been integrating something called an API for my team. It was called a Get Alerts API, and it's or I guess maybe I should have talked about what I'm actually working on at Walmart. I'm working on the Walmart health team. So we're working on implementing like Walmart health centers that are attached to every Walmart supercenter. So like in these health centers, like people can go, like after they're done shopping, they can go and see a doctor, get a checkup. They could see a dentist even, or an optometrist. And I'm working on the app that like stores all the patient data in it. So I worked on some APIs related to like patients being able to get like notifications if they get like a new message from their provider. I'll also work on APIs related to just putting pieces together of the app, like creating the upcoming appointments page and stuff. So yeah, that's mainly what I'll be working on. And then in between, like working on tickets, we'll have meetings usually related to like something called like sprint refinement, which is where we talk about like our progress that sprint and like if we need to adjust like any of our goals based off like the velocity, I guess, of like velocity is like how fast our team is working and how much we've achieved towards our sprint goals. So yeah, sorry, I know there's weird terminology. Just, you know.
No, for sure. And Lorraine, if you need to like
Yeah.
bring us back down and try to explain
Mhm.
something that we're saying,
Yeah.
let us know.
I'm just trying to focus on everything that you guys are talking about. But yeah, no, it's very interesting. Even as a person who doesn't code, it is interesting to hear just, you know, out of just a curiosity, what a day in the life is like in your job, you know. And I do always hear about the meetings, and so it's very interesting. And I do I find the whole healthcare thing very interesting as well, because that's some sensitive information. So I feel like that's a pretty high priority job right there that you have.
Yeah, so we actually work with legal a lot too, which I don't know if other I think in general, legal actually plays a surprisingly large role in software engineering. So we're constantly consulting with our legal team on like, and our design team on other features we need. Cause like you said, health is like, there's a lot of sensitive information there and data. Yeah. So yeah, when I work on tickets, I'm not completely alone. Like if I ever get stuck, because my team is really understanding. They know that I'm a new software engineer. So if I ever get stuck, I'll just like type in a Slack channel, like for my entire team, I'll explain my issue. The only thing is they ask like, oh, so that's another skill that I think is really important as a software engineer, being able to describe what issue you're having, because you can't just be like, hey guys, I'm stuck, please help. You have to like tell them exactly like what is going wrong. Like I'll usually attach a screenshot or show the error message. If I'm having trouble with something, I'll explain the steps I already took towards troubleshooting it, so that way we don't waste time, like so they don't do the same things that I've already done. So that's another important skill. Yeah, I think that's also something very important. Like knowing how to ask for help as a software engineer.
I find that interesting because, again, I think we've talked about this a couple times with the stereotype of coders. It's just behind the keyboard, but you know, communication is key. That's kind of like as a teacher, when my students are like, "I don't understand," and I'm like, "What don't you understand?" Like
Exactly.
Yeah. So it is a good skill to acquire, to learn how to describe exactly what you need help with.
And I'll admit, like, I was not very good at asking for help, like in a specific way, like until I became a software engineer. Cause like, I remember like, and as part of our training that Walmart had paid for, like when I would like work on projects and then I'd be like, hey, this isn't loading, can I have help? And then like, they'd be like, that's not specific enough. Explain like what message you're getting when it's not loading. What have you already tried? So that was a skill I had to develop actually. And once you develop that skill, it'll make it so much easier to get help quickly, and so that you can move on to the next issue.
Yeah, and that applies here too in the boot camp, you know, as a lot of us as students are needing help and stuff, and we're trying to get help from tutors in the Slack. I mean, that's the greatest opportunity is to practice here in the boot camp, learning how to ask the right questions about whatever problem that you're having, trying to solve those problems on your own at first, you know, using Stack Overflow and all that, and then really formulating the best question to get your help, you know, because sometimes people are just like, oh, this div is not showing, and it's like, okay, well, we don't have any context of what your code looks like or anything, so there's no way we can help you with that.
exactly.
But that's
Yeah.
cool, because I was going to ask you, as smart as you are, I'm sure that, starting your first engineering job was very intimidating. I'm sure it was kind of like, okay, especially when you look at the repositories that you're working with for the first time, like,
Oh
how does
yeah.
any of this stuff even work? Like, what was that process like for you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was really scary because Walmart uses something called a mono repo. It's basically like instead of just separate repositories for each project, everything is in one repo, which is why it's called the mono repo for like the entire company. So there's literally like thousands of different projects going on inside the repo. So you have to get really good at like learning how to navigate basically like your team's pages, also like becoming familiar with like the different tech that each team is using. I think that my biggest tip, I would say, when you're starting a new job as a software engineer would be like just asking people, like just getting familiar with your company's tech stack and also like how they do things, like read the Confluence pages. Hopefully people have documented things in Confluence pages or whatever. I guess I only know of Confluence. I don't know if there's like another, or I think there's one by Microsoft too, but yeah. Basically
Can
just
you
like,
explain what that is?
oh yeah, sure, Confluence. So it's what Walmart and I think a lot of other companies use to document basically what current policies and processes are in place for doing something. Like, for example, my team, Walmart Health, we have a Confluence. Yeah, a lot of companies use it. We have a Confluence page that describes like our like the technology we use, like what we I guess what we consider best practices. We have a page on like best practices for raising a PR. Also, we'll document like current issues we're having in Confluence. And we even use Confluence, I think, to just like have like a team page with like a little with contact information for like each member. It's basically like a Wikipedia for, I guess, for your company. Yeah. So getting familiar like with the all the documentation, I would say, is very important when you're first starting at a company, and just reading it. I know like if you use Chrome, I've like made so many bookmarks and tabs that show, like I have one for like onboarding, one for like our GitHub, and then like another one for like different projects I'm working on, just getting organized and yeah, reading through everything, I think is very
Yeah,
important. And
I
also,
love that you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I love that you mentioned reading documentation, whether it's the company Confluence page or you're reading documentation on some type of NPM package that you're using. Like, I think learning how to read documentation was the turning point in my software engineering career, which kind of moved me from beginner to like more advanced beginner.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And I think one of the best ways to do it is to start reading documentation about things that you're already familiar with, because that kind of, sometimes documentation out there is not that great, but reading documentation, I think, is one of the hardest parts of the job, and learning how to read it and learning how to understand it. And that's why I think starting with technologies or things that you already are familiar with kind of helps you ease into that, but it's super important.
It really is, because like I guess as a beginner, and I'm sure everyone else here as a beginner, you go in to like, you start a job thinking that everybody's an expert, everybody knows so much more than you. But then I know like recently my team switched testing, or not recently, a few months ago, my team switched testing to a software called a program called Jest Unit Testing. And I was like writing tests for a ticket I was working on. And then I asked my tech lead for help writing some Jest unit tests. And he was like, well, I'm going to have to do the same thing that you would do, read the documentation, because I'm new to this too. And then that like was, I guess, an eye opener for me. I'm just like, wait, all the answers are in the documentation. If I were to ask someone, they would do the same thing as me. So really it's up to me to know how to read the documentation and find the answers. It's, like you said, such an underrated skill, or probably the most important skill as a software engineer, is knowing how to read through documentation and find the answers you need, because there's like technology is changing so fast, or changes so fast in software engineering, that like a lot of things that you find through Googling will already be outdated. So the best source is actually just reading the documentation from whatever program it is directly, generally. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Not everybody has all the answers. It's just way too much information out there, way too many technologies. Things are moving way too fast for anybody to have all the answers. So Googling and reading docs is like the key.
Yes, definitely reading docs, especially if you plan on going into front end or full stack, because like I know React like updates like every few months. Like that technology updates so frequently that often things on Google, like those nice detailed guides might be a little outdated. So you need to be able to read like the very dry and boring documentation that companies put out. Yeah.
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 So do you think, let's go back now to when you were in Reskill. Is there anything, can you explain to our participants, maybe something that you did in Reskill, whether it was the team, when we were in the team phase, creating projects together, or anything before that, that maybe kind of prepared you a little for getting ready for your job?
I would say definitely don't skip the assignments. I know like it's really tempting. I've seen a lot of students just want to like skip, like rush through the assignments and turn it in just to get it done. But the assignments are to help you. Like it's the point of them isn't to just get it done, but to actually like learn as you're doing it. And so take all the time you need because it only benefits you. Don't feel like it's like a contest to get things done first or as quick as possible. Like really take your time with the assignments because those were really helpful to me. And then also like just working on a team, because even though a lot of people, like there's a stereotype of a software engineer just hunched over their desk working alone all day, it's actually it is like a completely team-based like job. So like learning how to work properly in teams and communicate was really helpful to me because all my work is team-based.
Now, so I know when we did our teams, we had a little bit of everything. We had our designer, our front end, our back end. Do you find that experience to be a reality now in your place of work, or do you have any contact with designers?
Oh, definitely. Every day
Okay.
I'm like messaging my designer. His name is Nick. We have a couple design people, but because I'm a front end like full stack engineer, like anytime I work on a project, I'll open do you guys use Figma? I can't remember for
We do,
files.
yeah.
Yep, we use Figma too. So get really familiar with Figma if you want to go into front end or full stack. So every time I start a project, one of the first things I do is I'll read the requirements on the ticket and then I'll look at the Figma file. And if something with the Figma file is unclear, I like reach out to my design UI UX people. And I'll ask them to clarify design, which is like almost every day. Yeah, so that's pretty accurate. And then like having, like I mentioned, we do have a project manager. We also have a product manager and a scrum master as well, and a tech lead on my team. So the design of teams at Reskill is completely accurate to how it is in the workplace, I would say.
I'm sure you have, being primarily front end, but you're considered full stack, that you communicate a lot with the back end in terms of like when you're using any types of APIs, that you're in communication with them, or at least looking at their code to see what kind of responses you expect from these APIs, or is that in the documentation as well as like what APIs return what kinds of things and what can you expect from them and all that?
Yeah, definitely. That's generally when I'll reach out to my backend team. Like if I like am working on integrating an API, I'll ask them like for like the Confluence page on that API endpoint that I'm working on integrating. And then I'll ask them questions like about endpoints or like responses if they're unclear. That's generally when I'll interact with the backend team.
Curious, what kind of CSS frameworks do you guys use there?
We use Telkion's CSS, like exclusively Telkion's. I'm not sure. It's basically, I don't know the best way to describe it. I'll type it in the chat, but
is it like Tailwind CSS?
It's a style for sure. It's basically Tachyons. Yeah, we use
Oh,
tachyons
yeah.
for everything. It's basically kind of like a CSS shortcut almost, and it like has everything like pre-styled. So it makes like working in CSS much more concise and clear. Like for example, if I wanted to do like margin 3 across the board tachyons, you just do M3, or you'll do class name equals M3,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
nice.
And you
Yeah,
put it right into the HTML, correct? It's
yes,
like,
exactly. Just
okay,
put it right there.
yeah, yeah.
You'll
So
use
yeah, it's
everything.
very much like Tailwind
Yeah.
CSS. We have some random project at work that uses that
Mhm.
as well. And I had no idea what tachyons was, but
Yeah.
yeah, I love those kinds of frameworks. They're great.
Yeah. We use tachyons. We also use something called TypeScript rather than JavaScript. Yeah. And TypeScript is great too. It makes like everything much more clear, because a lot of complaints about JavaScript are like the ambiguity or types like not being explicitly declared, and TypeScript definitely helps solve all the complaints about JavaScript.
So did you
So
learn TypeScript on the job, or did you already have some experience with it beforehand?
I learned it on the job. Yeah, so I would say it was pretty intimidating when I first started, because I was just like Walmart uses all this tech that I was not familiar with, like tachyons, TypeScript, and then like, the jest unit testing. But it's part of the job, just making sure you get familiar with the tech, read the documentation, spend a while reading it. Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, asking questions doesn't make you look dumb. It makes you look like you care and like you're curious, which they always like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you consult like any outside sources in terms of TypeScript? I think TypeScript is important. It's the future of JavaScript. And more companies are using it. So I think it's important for the students to be aware of and kind of maybe look into, but where can they
Yes.
look to learn some of that stuff?
I actually did. Let me type it in the chat. Give me one. Oh my gosh. Sorry, 1 second.
well, while you type that, let me ask a very simple, maybe dumb question, but I'm learning
There's
here.
no such thing as dumb questions at all.
Right. So my understanding of full stack is front end and back end, but now you're using the term that you're front end full stack. So can you explain that a little bit for me?
Oh, okay. So basically, it's weird. I just say front end generally because it's easier, but then I guess a lot of people consider like my work like on APIs back end. So I'm just like, am I full stack? I've just said like, I'll say front end / full stack just to make it clearer, because some people think that front end is pure web. Like, there's a lot of I think misconceptions about front end. Like, people think I'm like a UI UX designer, which is not true. Like, I actually work with UI UX designers, like who I mentioned. I'll like message them when I have questions about a Figma design. So I guess I'm just saying that to differentiate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a fine line between front end and back end development, which we kind of reached that point in our project last year. We're like, should the front end team take care of this responsibility? Should the back end team take care of this responsibility? I remember we were having those conversations last year.
So yeah, I know it a lot of people, I guess there's no like clear definition on which is which. Yes, so Scrimba was actually where I learned TypeScript, because they have a free TypeScript course, and there's not a lot of free TypeScript courses online. So when I started to learn TypeScript, that was the course I did on Scrimba for free. Yeah, so if you guys are interested, I definitely recommend it.
No, thank you. We have one question so far. So which program language have you found the most challenging?
Challenging. That's a good question. A lot of people like have complaints about JavaScript because it has its own sort of challenges. Like, it's not very responsive when you have an error. It doesn't, like other languages, like they won't like the second you do something wrong, it will throw an error and tell you exactly what's wrong. So some people would say JavaScript is the most frustrating language. But I guess because in most of my experience has been typing now I'm mixing up the terms. It's interpreted languages that like don't have to be compiled, right? So I guess the non-interpreted languages, which you need to first compile, like Java and C, are probably the most challenging for me because I started off with learning Python and JavaScript first. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to learn I guess non-interpreted languages like Java and C, and it's kind of unnerving how you have to like wait and see until it compiles to see what's like going wrong. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
JavaScript is both hard and easy to learn at first. It's easy to
Yeah.
learn the basics, but you're right. It's so easy to also build something with a ton of errors and not really know that those errors are there until your program's running.
Yeah.
Which is why TypeScript is such a big thing these days, because TypeScript helps you spot those errors before you even run your program.
Yeah, exactly. And it helps like eliminate ambiguity with like declaring types, which is great. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your portfolio and how you got that started? What kind of projects you have on there? Any advice on how to get a portfolio started?
Yeah, so I guess as a software engineer, your portfolio is pretty much your GitHub. Like some people do have separate websites. I think I do have a website through I don't know, one of those, or it's through GitHub. You can have like a free hosted website. I do have like a free like personal site on GitHub, but to be honest, I haven't updated in like a year or like since I got my job at Walmart. It's really out of date. So I guess your best bet for starting and maintaining a portfolio is your GitHub directly, because anytime you're working on something, just like upload it. Like I always recommend connecting anything you're working on to GitHub, so that way you can always like track like the history of your project, see like all the commits, and then like if you ever, GitHub Pages is the personal portfolio site. If you ever make any mistakes, you can always just revert back to like the last commit that didn't have a mistake. So I always recommend working through Git and GitHub when you can, or just always.
Yeah, and it shows them that you know how to use Git and GitHub.
Exactly. Yeah.
plus.
And because there's no company that doesn't use GitHub. I mean, Amazon like uses their own version of GitHub called like Amazon Hub, which is kind of silly, but but it works the same way. Yeah. So basically every company uses GitHub. Yeah. So just always push everything to GitHub. And then like if your GitHub starts to get a little too crowded, say you have like, I don't know, 70 repositories on GitHub, you can always like hide them and stuff. But in general, you always want.
I feel personally attacked.
Yeah, exactly. And like if your GitHub is getting a little muddled, maybe you can just like make some private. Yeah. And you want to showcase like your best work on GitHub generally, or like your work that's most relevant to the jobs you're applying to. You don't need to like have your first like hello world project on GitHub.
Right. Yeah, I have a lot of things on there that I want to mess around with Ruby today, so I just threw some Ruby stuff on there, and then I want to mess around with Python. So I have a bunch of repositories that are just like playgrounds basically that I need to get rid of.
You don't have to delete it if you want to keep the record, just make it hidden.
Right.
So I think that's the best way to get started with your portfolio. And then when you find the time, I recommend you make a GitHub page that just because your GitHub page, it doesn't just have to have like information about your projects. It can have information about you, like, because I think that's always good to have people know, like, what's behind the name, what's behind the resume. You can include personal stuff too, like what you like to do and stuff. Yeah.
Do you recommend, and I'm just saying this out of my own personal experience, the GitHub pages, you have to code those pages in order to create your portfolio. Would you recommend maybe later on, like a designer, maybe connecting with a full stack, a software developer, and maybe having them try to do your portfolio for you? Would that be like some good practice? What do you think?
Sure. If you wanted to have a design person, I actually still personally recommend that you do all the CSS, HTML yourself. Because I think like even back-end engineers, when they have an impressive like portfolio page that has like impressive front-end coding, it just shows that you're versatile, you're able to learn. So yeah, it's not a bad idea if you have a design friend that would want to do it, but I think if you can do it yourself, that's even better. Mm-hmm.
I meant the other way around. I myself, for example, as a designer, do you think that would be like a fun task for maybe someone to have practice? Because
Yeah.
I'm lucky that my husband was in the cohort last year. So he basically, I was like, here, I designed my portfolio. And then he pretty much just coded it up for me on the hub pages.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think that'd be a great idea. Yeah. Mhm.
All right, designers, start contacting these guys, start making your portfolio for you.
Yeah.
I have a very good question here. Somebody says that they feel that they can manage the technical interview, but not necessarily so good at the behavioral interview sections. You as a former HR person, do you have any recommendations on how someone can work on those, on the behavioral aspect of the interview?
The behavioral aspect, unfortunately, it's really just all practice. So basically, there's like, I think there's generally a common theme of behavioral questions. It's always like, or at least in my experience, it's always been like, tell us about a time that you worked on a project that you had a conflict. Tell us about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. Like, just get familiar. Like, you can also Google, like, say you're applying to like Meta, you can Google like Meta behavioral interview questions and just work, like, see those questions and just like ahead of time. I think that's the biggest issue that people have when they say that they are not good at behavioral interview questions. It's just they haven't like practiced their answers ahead of time. Because of course, if you like get a question, you have to think of it on the spot. Anyone would freeze or not like answer as well as they could. But when you've already practiced, you know, like you know exactly like which coworker you're going to mention you had an issue with and how you resolved that issue and what you learned from it. When you already know your answers to that, it's going to feel so much more natural saying it in the actual interview than if you like have to, you know, kind of think of it on the spot because you haven't already thought out what you want to say. So unfortunately, it's just putting the time into and practicing. And like you don't have to practice with a person. Honestly, like a lot of my questions, I just like kind of practice by like writing into a Google Docs page, like creating a Google Docs, like with behavioral questions and writing my answers into that. Yeah. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, I like that advice. And there is like a list of behavioral questions all over the internet. And like you said, it's just a matter of almost rehearsing it, not to sound, you know, fake doing it, but at least, like you said, you have all the stories already there. So you're not stuttering over your words or trying to think of a situation that's kind of all there and ready for it. So very good advice. Yeah.
And I would always try to spin everything into a positive. Like, don't just say, oh, me and this coworker had an argument and we fought about it and I won. Like, you know, have like a lesson that came out of it. Generally, people want to see like how you handle conflict and how you learn from things. So yeah, make sure to always spin things in a positive way is my other piece of advice.
You know, in teaching, we have, it's like the sandwich effect. Like we start off with something positive, talk about the little problem, and then end it with something positive because no one wants to hear all the negative, you know? It's like,
exactly.
I love this. However, here's my problem and here's how we resolved it. So I guess that's a good method to.
Yeah, exactly. And never talk negatively about your old company unless, or if you're going to say something negative, at least like mention like, how you learn from it, but don't like always avoid the urge to trash talk your old company or your old employers. That's another thing that I think a lot of people don't see. And I've been surprised that people are not familiar with that. So very important.
Oh, speaking of people, so what do you suggest as a person that's new in the boot camp or just starting off self-teaching and they're seeking advice from software engineers on LinkedIn, on Twitter? What's the best way to go about reaching out to people and really just getting advice on whatever it is that you want advice on, whether it's coding or interviewing or whatnot?
Yeah, so this was actually, it's funny that you asked that because I was mentioning earlier, I think before you all joined, I've noticed like I've gotten many requests because I think people can see that I don't have a software engineering degree. So I guess people have Googled me and seen that I'm a software engineer, but I don't actually have a degree. So I'll get a lot of people who are wanting to break into software engineering, asking me for advice and reaching out. And I think asking for advice is always great. Networking is great, but make sure that you demonstrate like basic social skills and I guess etiquette when you're reaching out. Because I was before you guys or before this started, I was mentioning that a lot of the times, like because I genuinely want to help people and answer everyone that reaches out to me. I will type like a long 5-paragraph answer to someone who has asked me a question, like asking for advice, and then I won't get a response back. So that's probably not the best way to network, because if you were to come back and ask me for a reference a few months later after like I wrote you a long response and you didn't say thank you or acknowledge that you got it, I might be less inclined to recommend you or refer you to a position. So that's always a good start, like making sure that when you network with people that you're very polite and I guess, just appreciative of like the knowledge that they have to share, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super important. The networking and just not forgetting to just be human, to
Yeah.
say thank you and just to really be appreciative of people taking their time when they spend the time to help you. I think
Yeah,
is great.
because you never know, like that person could be a referral for you one day. So,
Right.
and especially like my company now, like a lot of companies due to the economy, a lot of companies are like in a hiring freeze or doing layoffs. My company is actually growing. We have 8 back-end positions that are hiring. So,
Wow.
a lot of people have been asking me for referrals, and some of them have been people that were not super polite to me in the past or not super nice. So, yeah, definitely work on like having good people skills is actually very important in software engineering and networking, I would say.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think we have a few questions here on the side. I'm losing them though. One person asked, when should you start applying for a job?
Honestly, whenever you feel ready, because like there's no like limit on when you should apply. It's just like, like if you were to apply today, would you feel confident that you could pass a whiteboarding interview and a behavioral interview? That's more a benchmark, I think, than where you are in the boot camp process. Because some people, they start a boot camp already like having great like data structures and algorithm skills, and other people, they might need the entire boot camp and then maybe even after the boot camp, like more time to practice for interviews and to be ready. Because honestly, like I think right after I finished Reskill, like I don't know if I would have been able to pass whiteboarding interviews immediately after I'd finished Reskill. I took like about a month or so to really work on my whiteboarding skills. Yeah, but whereas I think like there were some people who were very advanced and I think they could have started applying before the boot camp was over.
Yeah. There's another question here. I am a Scrum Master. Any advice on how to pivot into software engineering? I'm starting from ground zero knowledge-wise also.
Oh, I mean, if you're a Scrum Master, especially like a technical Scrum Master, I think you're like you already have a great footing to stand on, like because you already know the process of like, the software engineering life cycle. So I think that's a great start. I've actually known quite a few Scrum Masters and product managers who have pivoted into software engineering because they already had that technical background and like that knowledge of the software engineering life cycle. So I would, again, just the same as anyone else, learn as much as you can in this boot camp, study outside of the boot camp too, and any concepts that you're not familiar with, practice for whiteboarding, behavioral interviews, and also like work on your networking as well, because referrals can be pretty powerful. Yeah.
There's
Yeah, I have
another
another
great question.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Do you know any websites to practice whiteboarding?
Oh yeah. I hate to say, but LeetCode, LeetCode and Grok, and that Grokking the coding interview site as well is very, and also I think someone mentioned NeetCode, and NeetCode is great because it shows the pattern. So like I always recommend mastering a pattern in LeetCode before moving on to the next pattern. That's how I would recommend it over just like grinding a random LeetCode question every day. Yeah.
All right. So I have jotted everything down and I will post this on Slack as well, all the resources we're talking about today.
Yes, LeetCode's going to come up again and again and again, unfortunately, or fortunately. Yeah. So, yeah.
Here's another one. How did you update your resume for software engineering with no prior software engineering experience?
That's a great question. So, like, in order to make sure that like my resume would actually like get through to recruit or like So I don't know if you're familiar, but basically like the advice I've given to people is make sure that your resume is customized to each job you're applying to. Make sure you have as much keywords like in qualifications from the job posting in your resume as possible. So what I put on my resume, even though I didn't have any prior software engineering like positions, was I put Reskill Americans. And I put also like I had a section for like technologies that I knew. And I also had like I linked to my GitHub as well. And I had a project section where I talked about relevant projects, like projects that were relevant to the position I was applying to. And then in my work history, I just made sure to like try to make my work history as relevant as I could to coding. Like I mentioned I was previously in HR. So I think I mentioned, like just like all the work I did with like tech, like the different HR techs, like working like with our HR system. So tried to spin it to show that I did have some technical background. I would try to do that if you can. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's good. I'm missing the other question that I had pulled up here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Oh,
how did you get a job as a software engineer? We kind of already answered that. Did you showcase your projects to your employer? That was kind of already answered. As a person with a speech impediment and speaking isn't my strong suit. So what advice would you give to somebody that maybe has more trouble with the speaking aspect of software engineering? Because
I think like, to be a software engineer, not everybody has to be like a leader who's like giving speeches every day and inspiring the team. Like you just have to demonstrate that you're a good listener and that you can work well on a team. Like you don't necessarily have to be like, great, like an articulate person who can like give amazing speeches or just like be a leader to be a great software engineer. Just show that you can listen, you can work well with team members. Like even if you're not great at speaking, like most of our communication is over Slack anyways. So like at least be good at like be good at written communication if you can be. Like I mentioned earlier, it's really important to know how to ask for help. Like how to frame your questions and like be as specific as possible. So yeah, I would say like being a great speaker is like far from being one of the most important skills as a software engineer that shouldn't hold you back.
And Lorraine,
just to
I
add on to
don't.
that, oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I was just gonna say our neurodivergent town hall.
Yeah.
We learned a lot from that town hall, and I think it's important if you have any kind of speech impediment or any type of disability that you communicate that beforehand, and that just makes it easier for you, makes it easier for everybody. I'm not sure if you were going to go along those lines.
Exactly, you took the words right out of my mouth. Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, just getting that all out in the open in the beginning, I
Yeah.
think would kind of make things easier for you.
Yeah, and I have seen many people who are software engineers like that. I've seen some people who are software engineers that are actually pretty like that are like high functioning autistic or have high functioning autism or different levels of autism. So yeah, it's totally possible to have some speech impediments or communication issues and still be a successful software engineer as long as you demonstrate that you're working, you have good communication other ways, like maybe through Slack or something. Yeah.
Question here, were most of your projects that you showcased on your resume or portfolio from Reskill Americans?
Actually, no. But that's not to say that the projects you're doing in Reskill Americans don't matter, because they do matter. They form the building blocks of my knowledge to do other projects that were like higher in complexity. So the projects that you're doing in Reskill, they're like tailored towards like people who are new to coding, which is good because you wouldn't want to just like no one who is new to coding is going to just start like immediately build the next Facebook. Like as much as we would all like to think so, it's just not going to happen. So like you need to start somewhere, and then the projects at Reskill are a great starting point, and it'll lead you into other more complex projects that you can add to your resume.
Yeah, I think Reskill is a foundation.
Yes.
These are the skills that we learned. Now go out there and use them and improve on them. So I feel like, yeah, if you're going to look at Reskill in that way, it's, you know, you're getting the knowledge, you're learning how to make a portfolio or how to do a project, and then you can build from that.
Yeah. Like I think Alex mentioned earlier, he follows me on GitHub and he saw like after Reskill ended, I was doing way more projects and other things. So yeah, exactly. Reskill prepared me to be able to do those other projects.
Do you say, would you, what's your advice on freelance work? And do you think that something like that can go into work history or projects?
Freelance work, yeah, definitely. It could go into work history. Absolutely. I think a lot of devs, especially now with the economy being as tough as it is, a lot of devs are doing freelance work right now because I personally have quite a few friends that have been laid off from like Meta and Amazon recently. And they're just like doing freelance projects and work that they can still put on their resume. I mean, it's still demonstrating that you know the like, or you have the skills. So yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I think doing freelance work in absence of just not working is much better. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you can, yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with the, you know, if you have the skills to do freelance work, then you, like you said, it's maybe not have a gap in employment.
Yeah, definitely. And yes, when I say projects, I mean the ones that you do on your job or that you do for fun. Yeah. Anything that you think would be relevant to the position you're applying for. Mm-hmm.
Emmy, thank you so much for all this advice, all this intel on software development. It was very much appreciated. I mean, even I think I understand a little bit better, so you did a great job.
I'm so glad. I really hope it was helpful. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or somewhere. Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah, so maybe I'll do that. I'll share your LinkedIn information with you. I'm sorry, with our participants, if you're okay with that. And I have a list of everything that you share with us. I'll put that on the Slack channel as well. I'm just gonna recap some of the announcements in case anybody came in late. Just some reminders that next week, December 19th, and the week after that, which is December 26th, there will be no new coursework being released on Moodle, but you can absolutely use that time for any assignments that you still have not completed. Next week is our last town hall for the year. We do have a designer coming on Monday, December 19th to answer any of those designer questions we may have. And we will resume those town halls. And I'll repeat this again next week, back in January 9th. So no, coursework this week, yes, this is the last week before the end of the year, before we have winter break. So winter break is next week, and I'll post this on Slack as well. It is the week of the 19th and the week of the 26th. Those 2 weeks will be more like a catch-up period for those of you that have not completed all your assignments yet. And tutors will be available to help and answer any questions. And you know, Alex and I will be on Slack answering questions as well. So again, thank you, Emmy, so much. Very insightful, appreciated.
Yeah, it was a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Emmy.
Yeah, good luck, everyone. I wish you the best. Great. Bye.
Thank you. All right, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.